The train doors were closing when Naomi Ellison forced her way through the gap, her bag catching on the metal edge before she pulled it free. Her heart was still pounding from the run across the platform. She had missed 2 trains already that night, and she could not afford to miss a third. She walked down the aisle, scanning for a seat, but every row was full. Bodies leaned against windows. Bags sat on empty cushions like silent warnings not to ask. She kept walking, car after car, until she reached the last one. There was only one open seat left on the entire train. It was beside a man sitting alone near the window, his face turned away from her, a long pale scar running from his temple down to his jaw. He wore a dark coat despite the warm night, and his hands rested still on his knees, like a man waiting for something that had not yet arrived. Naomi hesitated. Something about him made the air feel heavier, but the train was already moving, and there was nowhere else to go. "Is this taken?" she asked. He did not answer right away. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were calm, in a way that did not match the tension in his jaw. He shook his head once, barely a motion at all, and shifted slightly to give her room. She sat down, pulling her bag onto her lap, and stared straight ahead, trying to steady her breathing. For the first few minutes, everything felt ordinary. The train rattled along its tracks, the overhead lights flickered faintly, and somewhere behind her, a child laughed at something on a phone screen. Naomi allowed herself to relax, just slightly. She had a long night ahead of her, and sitting next to a stranger with a scarred face was not the strangest thing that had happened to her that week. She had left her apartment in a hurry, packed only what fit into one bag, and boarded this train because she needed distance, real distance, between herself and the mess she had left behind. Then, without warning, the sound around her began to change. It was not silence at first. It was a fading, the way a radio loses its signal, static replacing music. The child's laughter cut off mid-breath. The murmur of conversations around her thinned, then vanished. Naomi looked up, expecting someone to have shouted for quiet, but no one had. The passengers were still there, still moving their mouths in some cases, but the sounds did not follow. A woman across the aisle was clearly speaking to the man beside her, her lips forming words, her hands gesturing, but nothing reached Naomi's ears. She turned to the man beside her, about to ask if he heard it too, but the words caught in her throat when she saw his expression. He was not confused. He was not startled. His eyes had shifted toward the front of the train, and his hand had moved, slowly, until it rested near the inside of his coat. "What is happening?" Naomi whispered, though she was not sure her own voice made any sound either. He looked at her then, fully, for the first time. Up close, the scar was more visible, a thin line that had healed badly, as if whoever had once stitched it had done so quickly, without much care for how it would look afterward. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the dim light, and there was something old in them, something tired, that did not match the rest of his face. "Stay still," he said. His voice was low, steady, but it was the only voice she could hear clearly in the whole car. "Do not look at anyone. Do not speak unless I speak first." "I do not understand," Naomi said. Her pulse was hammering now, loud in her own ears, the only sound she trusted. "Why is everyone so quiet?" "They are not quiet," he said. "You are just starting to notice something you were not supposed to notice." That answer terrified her more than silence itself. She looked around the car again. The passengers were still moving, blinking, shifting in their seats, but their faces had taken on a strange stillness, as if each of them existed behind a pane of glass, sealed away from her. A man 3 rows ahead turned a page in his newspaper with no rustle of paper at all. A teenager tapped rapidly at her phone screen, but no clicks followed her fingers. It was as if the world had been muted, all except for this one man beside her and the space immediately around them. Naomi's first instinct was to stand up, to move to another car, to put distance between herself and whatever was happening. She started to rise, but his hand closed gently around her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. "Do not move yet," he said. "Not until I know who else is on this train." "You're scaring me," she said. "Good," he replied. "Being scared will keep you alive tonight." She wanted to laugh, the kind of laugh that comes when a person cannot process what they are hearing, when the brain reaches for humor, as a way of pushing back against fear. But nothing about his face invited laughter. He was scanning the car methodically, his eyes moving from passenger to passenger, lingering slightly longer on some than others. Naomi tried to follow his gaze, tried to understand what he was looking for, but all she saw were strangers, ordinary people, on an ordinary night train, each sealed inside their own silent world. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who should not be sitting next to you right now," he said. "But it is too late to change that." The train rattled over a section of uneven track, and for a moment, the ordinary vibration of the world returned, ordinary in the sense that Naomi could feel it in her spine, in her teeth. She gripped the edge of her seat, grounding herself in that physical sensation, because everything else about the moment felt wrong, unreal, like a dream she could not wake from. "My name is Naomi," she said, because she needed to say something, needed some anchor of normal conversation in the middle of whatever this had become. He studied her for a moment before answering. "Damon." Just the one word, no surname, no explanation. She waited for more, but he offered nothing else, his attention already returning to the car around them. "Damon," she repeated, testing the name, trying to make it feel less strange in her mouth. "Why did you sit here? Why was this seat the only one open?" For the first time since she had sat down, something flickered across his face that was not calm. It was there and gone in an instant, but she caught it, a kind of grim understanding, as if her question had confirmed something he already suspected. "That is a very good question," he said quietly, "one I intend to find the answer to." Naomi felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature of the train car. She thought back to the platform, to the rush of boarding, to the way every other car had seemed impossibly full, while this one held a single open seat, as if it had been waiting for her specifically. She had assumed it was simply bad luck, the kind of coincidence that happens on a crowded night. Now she was not sure luck had anything to do with it at all. "You think someone put me here," she said slowly, "on purpose." Damon did not answer directly. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his eyes fixed on something near the front of the car, something Naomi could not immediately see. She followed his gaze and noticed a man standing near the connecting door between cars, a man in a gray jacket who had not been there a moment before, or who she simply had not noticed until now. He was not moving, he was not looking at his phone or reading or doing any of the small things passengers do to pass time. He was simply standing, watching, his eyes moving slowly across the rows of seated passengers. "Do you see him?" Damon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Naomi breathed. "Who is he?" "I do not know his name," Damon said, "but I know what he is." "What is he?" Damon's jaw tightened. A problem. The man in the gray jacket began to walk down the aisle, slow, deliberate steps, his eyes scanning each row as he passed. Naomi felt her whole body go rigid. She wanted to look away, to pretend she had not noticed him at all, but some instinct told her that looking away would be just as dangerous as staring. Damon's hand found hers under the edge of her bag, not holding it exactly, just resting there, a silent instruction to remain still. The man passed row after row without pausing, his expression unreadable, and for a moment Naomi allowed herself to hope he would walk straight past them, that this was nothing, that her fear had built a monster out of an ordinary passenger looking for a seat. But when he reached their row, he stopped. He did not look at Naomi. His eyes were fixed entirely on Damon, and something passed between the two men that Naomi could not name, a recognition, cold and immediate, the kind that exists between people who have crossed paths before, under circumstances neither of them wanted to repeat. "It has been a long time," the man in the gray jacket said. His voice, unlike everything else in the car, carried clearly, cutting through whatever strange silence had settled over the rest of the passengers. "Not long enough," Damon replied. The man's eyes flicked briefly to Naomi, assessing her the way someone might assess an object rather than a person, and then returned to Damon. "You brought company this time. Interesting choice." "She has nothing to do with this," Damon said, his voice low and hard. "Let her go, and we can finish whatever this is between just the two of us." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That is not how this works, and you know it. Naomi's mind raced, trying to catch up with a conversation that felt like it belonged to a different world than the one she had woken up in that morning. She had boarded this train to escape a life falling apart, a job she had lost, a relationship that had ended badly, a string of bad decisions that had left her scraping together enough money for a one-way ticket to nowhere in particular. She had not expected to find herself in the middle of something that felt, impossibly, like danger, real danger, the kind she had only read about or seen in films. "I do not know what is happening," Naomi said, forcing her voice to remain steady, even as her hands trembled in her lap. "I do not know either of you. I just needed a seat." The man in the grey jacket studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, calculating, considering. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps you are exactly where you were meant to be." Before Naomi could ask what he meant, the train lurched, a sudden jolt that threw several passengers forward in their seats, though none of them reacted, still trapped in whatever silent bubble had settled over the car. Damon used the distraction to rise halfway from his seat, placing himself slightly between Naomi and the man in grey, a movement so quick and controlled that she barely registered it happening until it was done. "Walk away," Damon said. "This is your only warning." The man's smile did not fade, but something colder entered his eyes. "You know that is not going to happen. Not this time." He turned and walked back down the aisle, disappearing through the connecting door at the front of the car, his footsteps somehow inaudible, despite everything else about him seeming so solid, so real. The moment he vanished from sight, the sounds of the train came rushing back, all at once, overwhelming in their sudden return. The child's laughter, the murmur of conversation, the rattle of wheels on track. Naomi gasped, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time, though she could not remember doing so. "What was that?" she demanded, turning to Damon, her voice shaking now that the strange stillness had broken. "What just happened?" Damon sat back slowly, his eyes still fixed on the door where the man had disappeared. "That," he said quietly, "was the beginning of a very bad night." "You have to tell me something," Naomi said. "Anything. Who is he? Why did the whole train go silent? Why did he look at me like that?" Damon was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that had not been there before, the weight of a story he clearly did not want to tell, but knew he could no longer avoid. "His name is Victor Kane," Damon said, "and a long time ago I worked for him. I am not proud of the things I did in those years, and I spent a long time trying to walk away from all of it. I thought I had finally succeeded. I thought I had disappeared cleanly enough that he would never find me again." "And now he has," Naomi said. "Now he has," Damon agreed. "And the fact that he found me on this particular train, on this particular night, sitting beside you specifically, is not something I believe happened by accident." Naomi felt the floor of her understanding tilt beneath her, the same way the train had lurched only moments before. "You think this is about me too? Not just you?" Damon turned to look at her fully then, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to read something written there that even she could not see. "I think," he said slowly, "that whoever arranged for that seat to be the only one open on this entire train wanted the two of us sitting together tonight, and I intend to find out why before this night is over." Outside the window, the city lights had begun to thin, replaced by the darker stretches of countryside that lay beyond the last stations of the urban line. Naomi stared out at the passing dark, her reflection ghostly against the glass, and understood, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her chest, that whatever life she had been running from when she boarded this train was nothing compared to whatever she had just run into instead. The train rolled on into the night, carrying its silent passengers and its two wide-awake ones deeper into a darkness that had only just begun to reveal its shape. Naomi did not sleep, though the hour was late enough that her body begged for it. She sat rigid in her seat, watching the door at the front of the car, as if Victor Kane might reappear at any moment, and beside her, Damon seemed to be doing the same, his posture never fully relaxing, his eyes tracking every small movement in the car around them. The other passengers had returned to their ordinary evening routines, unaware, it seemed, that anything strange had happened at all. The woman across the aisle, laughed at something on her phone. The teenager continued typing messages with quick thumbs. It was as if the silence, and the man who had caused it, had never existed. "They do not remember," Naomi said quietly, glancing around the car. None of them noticed. "They were not meant to," Damon replied. "What Victor did back there was not for them. It was a message, and it was meant only for me." How is that even possible? How does someone make an entire train car go silent and then bring it back like nothing happened? Damon rubbed a hand across his jaw, over the old scar that marked his face, a gesture that seemed almost unconscious, born of habit rather than thought. There are people who can do things most others would not believe possible. Victor surrounds himself with them. He always has. It used to be part of what made him so dangerous. You never knew what you were truly walking into when you crossed him, because the rules that applied everywhere else did not seem to apply to him. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, though the train car was not cold. "And you worked for a man like that?" "I did," Damon admitted. There was no attempt to soften the truth, no excuse offered alongside the confession. "For 6 years, I was one of the people Victor trusted most. I did things during that time that I have spent every year since trying to make right, though I know there is no making some things right, not truly. I told myself I was protecting people. I told myself the ends justified whatever I did to reach them. It took me a long time to understand how much of a lie that was." "What made you leave?" His expression darkened, the calm mask slipping just slightly to reveal something rawer underneath. "There was an assignment," he said. "One I refused to carry out. Victor does not tolerate refusal. The scar on my face is what happened when I told him no for the first time in 6 years." Naomi's stomach turned at the casual way he mentioned it, as if the violence done to him had become simply another fact of his life, another detail in a story he had told himself so many times that the horror of it had worn smooth, like a stone shaped by years of water. "And after that, you just left?" "I disappeared," Damon said. "I built a new name, a new life, in a city far from anywhere Victor operated. I kept my head down. I avoided anyone who might recognize me. I thought, after enough years passed, that he had either forgotten about me or decided I was not worth the trouble of hunting down. But he found you anyway." "He found me tonight," Damon said. "Which means either my new life was never as hidden as I believed, or something changed recently that made finding me worth his time again." The train rattled through a long stretch of darkness. No city lights visible beyond the windows now, only the occasional distant glow of a farmhouse or a lonely road crossing. Naomi found herself studying Damon's profile in the dim light, trying to reconcile the calm, careful man beside her with the version of himself he had just described, a man capable of the kind of work that earned him enemies willing to hunt him across years and distance. "Why should I believe any of this?" she asked, though even as she said it, she knew the question was more for her own comfort than because she doubted him. She had seen the silence with her own eyes. She had seen Victor's face, cold and certain, promising violence without needing to say the words aloud. "You do not have to believe me," Damon said. "But I would rather you understand the danger you are in than walk into it blind." "What danger exactly?" "You keep saying this is about both of us, but you have not explained why." Damon was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully before he spoke again. "Victor does not waste effort. If he wanted to kill me quickly, quietly, he could have done it 100 times over the years without ever showing himself. The fact that he found this particular train, arranged for this particular seat to be the only one open, and made sure you were the one who sat in it, tells me he wants something more complicated than simply ending my life." "Like what?" "I do not know yet," Damon admitted, and for the first time, Naomi heard something close to fear in his voice, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. "But I intend to find out before he decides to show his hand again." As if summoned by the conversation itself, the connecting door at the front of the car slid open, and a woman stepped through, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She wore a simple traveling coat, her dark hair pulled back neatly, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made Naomi instinctively straighten in her seat. The woman's eyes swept the car once, briefly, before settling on Damon and Naomi with unmistakable purpose. "That is not good," Damon muttered under his breath. "Who is she?" Naomi whispered. Someone I used to trust, Damon said. Her name is Priya. She worked alongside me during my years with Victor. If she is here, it means Victor sent more than just a warning tonight. Priya approached their row and stopped, her expression unreadable, betraying none of the tension Naomi could feel radiating from Damon beside her. It has been a long time, Damon, she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, which somehow made the moment more unsettling rather than less. Long enough, Damon replied, echoing the same words he had used with Victor earlier, though his tone carried something different now, something closer to regret than defiance. Victor wants to speak with you, Priya said, properly, not through games and silent train cars. He asked me to bring you to him when the train stops at the next station. And if I refuse? Priya's gaze flicked briefly to Naomi, and something in that look sent a fresh wave of fear through her, colder and sharper than anything before it. Then, he will find other ways to make his point. Ways that will not stop at silence. Naomi understood the threat immediately, even without further explanation. Her hands tightened into fists in her lap, nails pressing crescents into her palms, an attempt to ground herself against the rising panic threatening to overwhelm her. I have nothing to do with whatever is between you two, she said, forcing steel into her voice, despite the tremor beneath it. I do not even know either of you. I am afraid that stopped mattering the moment you sat down, Priya said, not unkindly, but without any softness either. Victor has decided you matter now. And once he decides something like that, there is very little any of us can do to change his mind. Damon rose slowly from his seat, positioning himself once more between Naomi and the threat standing before them, a gesture that had already become familiar in the short time she had known him, though it did little to slow the racing of her heart. Tell Victor I will meet him, Damon said, alone. Naomi stays on this train. Priya's expression did not change. That is not how this works, Damon, and you know it. Victor was very specific. Both of you, or neither of you, and I do not think you want to find out what neither of you means in practice. The threat hung in the air between them, heavy and unmistakable. Naomi looked between Damon and Priya, trying to find some option, some way out that did not end in disaster, but she could see nothing, no clear path forward that did not require trusting either the man beside her or walking directly into whatever trap had been laid ahead. How much time do we have? Damon asked, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. The train reaches the next station in 20 minutes, Priya said. I would use that time wisely, if I were you. She turned and walked back toward the connecting door, disappearing through it with the same quiet confidence with which she had arrived, leaving Damon and Naomi alone once more, amid the ordinary hum of the train car, surrounded by passengers who remained blissfully unaware of the danger unfolding so close to them. 20 minutes, Naomi repeated numbly. 20 minutes to do what, exactly? Damon sat back down beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes distant, as he worked through possibilities she could not begin to guess at. 20 minutes to decide whether we walk off this train together and face Victor on his terms, or whether we find another way off before that station arrives. Is there another way? He looked at her then, and for the first time since she had sat beside him, she saw something like genuine calculation in his expression, the mind of a man who had spent years surviving situations exactly like this one, weighing options most people would never have to consider. There might be, he said slowly, but it would mean trusting me completely and doing exactly what I say, without hesitation, the moment I say it. Naomi thought of her old life, the one she had been so desperate to escape only hours earlier, the job she had lost, the apartment she could no longer afford, the relationship that had ended in a way that still made her chest ache when she thought about it too long. None of it compared to the fear coursing through her now, and yet, strangely, she found herself feeling something else beneath the fear, something that felt almost like clarity. Whatever happened next, she would not simply sit and wait for danger to arrive. She would meet it. Tell me what to do, she said. Damon studied her for a long moment as if searching for any hint of hesitation, any sign that her resolve might crack under pressure. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded once, decisively, and began to speak in a low, urgent voice, outlining a plan that would require every bit of nerve Naomi possessed, and then some. Outside the window, the darkness continued to rush past, and somewhere ahead, closer with every passing minute, the station waited, along with everything Victor Kane had planned for their arrival. The plan Damon described was simple in words, but dangerous in practice. There was a maintenance door near the rear of the train, used by workers during repairs, that opened onto a narrow walkway connecting to the last car. If they could reach it before the train slowed for the station, they could uncouple themselves from whatever welcome Victor had prepared on the platform, disembarking instead through the emergency exit at the very back, into the dark countryside beyond the tracks. "It sounds like something from a film," Naomi said, though her voice held no humor. "It is not glamorous," Damon admitted. "It is desperate, but desperate is better than walking willingly into a trap." They moved through the train car by car, trying to appear unhurried, despite the tightness in Naomi's chest with every step. Damon walked slightly ahead, scanning each new car before allowing her to follow, his instincts sharpened by years of exactly this kind of careful movement through dangerous spaces. Naomi kept her eyes down, avoiding contact with any of the passengers they passed, though she could not shake the feeling that some of them were not passengers at all, that Victor's people might be scattered throughout the train, watching, waiting. In the fourth car, she spotted a man she was certain she recognized from the platform earlier that night, a man who had seemed, at the time, to be simply another traveler, waiting for the same train. Now, seeing him again, seated near the door with his eyes tracking their movement far too closely, she understood that nothing about tonight had been left to chance. "Damon," she whispered, catching his sleeve. He followed her gaze and gave the smallest nod, acknowledging what she had seen, without drawing attention to it. "Keep walking," he murmured. "Do not look at him again." They passed through the car and into the next, and Naomi forced herself to breathe evenly, to move as if nothing were wrong, though every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. Behind them, she heard the faint sound of someone rising from their seat, footsteps falling into rhythm with their own, and she understood, without needing to turn around, that the man from the platform had begun to follow them. "He is behind us," she breathed. "I know," Damon said. "Do not run. Running tells him we know he is there. Walking tells him we might just be passengers looking for the dining car." It took every ounce of self-control Naomi possessed to maintain a steady pace, to resist the overwhelming urge to bolt for the nearest exit. They reached the sixth car, and the crowd here was thinner, the late hour having emptied out most of the seats, leaving long stretches of empty aisle between scattered groups of tired travelers. The maintenance door Damon had described stood near the far end, marked with a small sign that most passengers would never have reason to notice. "There," Damon said quietly, nodding toward it. "Once we are through, we move fast. There will be no time to hesitate." They reached the door, and Damon's hand closed around the release lever, testing it briefly before pulling it open. Cold night air rushed in immediately, carrying with it the roar of the train's engine and the rushing wind of their speed, loud enough that conversation would be impossible once they stepped through. Naomi glanced back one final time and saw the man from the platform now only a few rows behind them, his pace quickening, his hand moving toward something inside his jacket. "Now," Damon said, and pulled her through the door. The narrow walkway beyond was little more than a metal grate suspended between cars, wind tearing at their clothes, the ground below rushing past in a dark blur that made Naomi's stomach lurch with vertigo. Damon kept a firm grip on her arm, guiding her along the walkway toward the final car, his movements sure despite the chaos of wind and noise surrounding them. Behind them, the maintenance door burst open again, and the man from the platform stepped through, his face set with grim determination, something metallic glinting in his hand. "Move," Damon shouted over the roar of wind, pushing Naomi ahead of him through the door into the last car. The final car was nearly empty, only a handful of passengers scattered among the seats, none of them paying attention to the sudden commotion at the rear of the train. Damon slammed the door behind them and threw the manual lock into place, buying them only seconds before their pursuer would find another way through. "The emergency exit is at the very back," Damon said, already moving, pulling Naomi along with him. "Once we are off the train, we run for the tree line and do not stop until we are certain no one is following." They reached the emergency exit, a heavy door marked with warning signs about unauthorized use, and Damon wasted no time engaging the release mechanism, ignoring the alarm that immediately began to sound, a shrill warning that cut through even the roar of the train's passage. The door swung open, revealing the dark countryside rushing past below, the ground a blur of shadow and motion that made the prospect of jumping seem impossibly dangerous. "We cannot jump from a moving train," Naomi said, her voice rising in panic for the first time since the ordeal had begun. "The train is slowing," Damon said, and she realized he was right, the pitch of the engine shifting, the rhythm of the wheels on track beginning to change as the train approached the station ahead. "It will be slow enough in a few moments. Trust me." Behind them, the locked door shuddered under the force of someone trying to force it open, the metal groaning under the strain. Naomi's pulse hammered so loudly in her ears that she could barely hear anything else, but she forced herself to focus on Damon's voice, on the plan he had laid out, on the singular goal of surviving the next few minutes. "Now," Damon said, and together they leaped from the train into the darkness beyond. The impact was harder than Naomi had braced for, her shoulder striking the ground first before she rolled, gravel and grass tearing at her clothes and skin as momentum carried her forward. She came to a stop in a tangle of limbs, gasping for breath, her whole body aching, but alive, undeniably alive, the train already pulling away above them as it continued its approach toward the station. Damon was beside her a moment later, pulling her upright despite the pain evident in his own movements, his eyes already scanning the darkness around them for any sign of pursuit. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency rather than gentleness, though Naomi understood the concern underneath it. "I do not know," she admitted, testing her limbs, finding bruises and scrapes but nothing broken. "I think I am all right." "We need to move," Damon said. "They will search the tracks once they realize we are not on the train when it arrives at the station. We cannot stay in the open." They half walked, half ran toward the tree line Damon had mentioned, the dark shapes of trees rising ahead of them against the star-scattered sky. Naomi's legs shook with adrenaline and exhaustion, but she pushed forward, matching Damon's pace as best she could, driven by a fear that had become, somehow, more focused now that she had something concrete to do about it. They reached the shelter of the trees and paused, both of them breathing hard, listening for any sound of pursuit in the darkness behind them. In the distance, faintly, Naomi could hear the sound of the train slowing as it pulled into the station, the hiss of brakes, the distant murmur of a platform full of waiting passengers, none of whom knew, or would ever know, what had just happened, only a few miles back along the tracks. "Do you think it worked?" Naomi asked, her voice barely a whisper. Damon did not answer immediately, his eyes still fixed on the darkness around them, alert to any sign of danger. "For now," he said finally, "but Victor does not give up easily, and he will realize very quickly that we did not arrive at that station." "So what do we do?" "We keep moving," Damon said. "There is a road not far from here, if I remember this stretch of countryside correctly. We can find somewhere to stay off the main paths until daylight, somewhere Victor's people will not think to look." Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, the cold night air finally registering now that the immediate adrenaline of their escape had begun to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel impossibly heavy. "This was supposed to be a simple train ride," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I just wanted to get away from my old life for a little while." Damon looked at her, and something in his expression softened, just slightly, the hardened edges of his caution giving way to something closer to sympathy. "I am sorry you were pulled into this," he said. "You did not deserve any of it." "Neither did you, probably," Naomi said. "Not really. Not this version of it, anyway." He did not respond to that, his jaw tightening instead, old guilt flickering briefly across his features before he pushed it aside, focus returning to the immediate danger of their situation. "We need to keep moving," he said again. "We can talk more once we are somewhere safer." They began walking through the darkness of the trees, the sounds of the distant train station fading behind them with every step, replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant call of some nocturnal bird settling in for the night. Naomi followed close behind Damon, trusting him now in a way she could not have imagined only hours earlier, bound together by the shared danger of the night and the uncertain path that still lay ahead of them. Somewhere behind them, in the lit windows of the station they had avoided, Victor Kane would already be receiving word of their disappearance, and Naomi understood, with a certainty that settled cold in her stomach, that this was far from over. Whatever Victor wanted from them, he would not stop simply because they had slipped away once. Men like him, she was beginning to understand, did not know how to stop. The forest stretched on ahead of them, dark and unfamiliar, and somewhere within it, they would have to find a way to survive, not just this night, but whatever came after it as well. They walked for nearly an hour before Damon finally slowed his pace, guiding them toward a small structure barely visible through the trees, an abandoned equipment shed that must once have belonged to whatever farm bordered this stretch of woodland. The wooden walls had weathered gray with age, and the door hung slightly open on rusted hinges, but it offered shelter, and after everything they had endured that night, shelter felt like more than Naomi had dared hope for. "It is not much," Damon said, pushing the door open carefully, checking the interior before allowing her inside. "But it will do for a few hours, until we can move again safely." Naomi stepped inside, grateful for the reprieve from the cold night air, and sank onto an old wooden crate that served as the only available seating in the cramped space. Her whole body ached, the adrenaline that had carried her through the escape finally beginning to fade, leaving exhaustion and a deep, uneasy fear in its place. Damon remained near the door, watching the tree line through the gap, where it did not quite close, his vigilance seemingly endless, despite the hours of tension they had already endured. "You should rest," he said, without turning to look at her. "I will keep watch." "I do not think I can rest," Naomi admitted, "not with everything that just happened." Damon was quiet for a long moment before he finally turned, his expression unreadable in the dim moonlight filtering through the gaps in the shed's walls. "I understand," he said, "but you will need whatever strength you can find, because tomorrow will not be easier than tonight." Naomi studied him, this man she had known for only a handful of hours, but who now felt inexplicably tied to whatever remained of her future, at least until this danger resolved itself one way or another. "Tell me the truth," she said, "all of it. What did you do working for Victor that made him hate you enough to hunt you down years later?" Damon's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might refuse to answer, might retreat back into the guarded silence that had defined much of their earlier conversation. But something in his posture shifted, a decision made, and he sat down slowly across from her, the old wood creaking beneath his weight. "Victor built an organization around fear," he began, his voice low and measured, as if each word cost him something to speak aloud. "Not the kind of fear that comes from violence alone, though there was plenty of that too, the kind of fear that comes from control, from making people believe they had no other choice but to do what he demanded. I was young when I started working for him, young enough to believe the things he told me about protecting people, about maintaining order in places that had none. It took years before I understood how much of that was simply a story he told, to make his own cruelty easier to swallow." "What changed?" Naomi asked. "There was a family," Damon said, his eyes distant now, lost in memory. "Victor wanted to make an example of someone who had crossed him, and the assignment involved harming people who had nothing to do with the actual offense. Innocent people. I refused. I told him I would not be part of it, that there had to be a line even in the world he had built, and he made it very clear that in his organization there was no such line. And that is when he did this," Naomi said quietly, gesturing toward the scar on his face without needing to name it directly. Damon touched the scar unconsciously, the same gesture she had noticed before, a habit worn smooth by years of remembering. "This was the least of what he threatened," he said. "I was fortunate to escape with only this as a reminder of that night. Others who crossed him were not so fortunate." "And the family? The ones you refused to harm?" "I managed to warn them before Victor's people arrived," Damon said. "They disappeared before anything could happen to them. It was the last decent thing I did before I disappeared myself, and it is the only reason I have ever been able to look at myself in a mirror since." Naomi absorbed this, trying to reconcile the calm, controlled man before her with the violence he had both witnessed and, by his own admission, participated in during his years with Victor, and yet, somehow, none of it diminished the strange trust that had grown between them over the course of this impossible night. If anything, it deepened her understanding of him, of the weight he carried, of the reasons behind every careful, guarded movement she had witnessed since the moment she sat down beside him on the train. "Why did you stay with him as long as you did?" she asked. "Before that family, before the refusal, why not leave sooner?" Damon was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same careful weight he seemed to give everything. "Because I told myself I was doing good within a broken system," he said finally. "Because leaving felt like giving up on all the people I believed I was protecting by staying close enough to Victor to influence which harms he chose and which he did not. It took me far too long to understand that there is no such thing as controlling a man like Victor from the inside. You either serve his purposes completely, or you become an obstacle to be removed." "And now you are an obstacle again," Naomi said, "because of me." "No," Damon said firmly, meeting her eyes directly for the first time in the conversation. "I became an obstacle the moment I refused him all those years ago. Whatever brought him back into my life tonight, it is not your fault. You simply happened to be standing in the path of something that was already coming for me." Naomi wanted to believe him, wanted to accept the reassurance he offered, but something about Priya's words on the train still troubled her, the certainty with which she had said Victor had decided Naomi mattered now. That was not the language of an accidental collision between two unrelated dangers. That was the language of a plan, deliberate and specific, and Naomi could not shake the feeling that there was something more to her own presence in this story than either of them yet understood. "There is something else," she said slowly, "something you have not considered." Damon's eyes sharpened with attention. "What is it?" Priya said, "Victor decided I matter now," Naomi said. "Not that I happen to be near you. That he decided, as if choosing me was deliberate, not incidental." Damon's expression darkened as the implication settled over him, the same realization that had been building in Naomi's own mind since the words were first spoken. "You are right," he said slowly. "That is not the language of coincidence." "Is there any reason Victor would specifically want someone like me involved?" Naomi asked. "I am nobody. I lost my job 3 weeks ago. I do not have money or connections or anything that would make me useful to a man like him." Damon studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, a question forming behind his eyes that he seemed almost afraid to ask aloud. "What is your full name?" he said finally. "Your family name, and anyone significant in your past. Parents, relatives, anyone with money or influence, even distant." The question caught Naomi off guard. "Ellison," she said slowly. "Naomi Ellison. My parents are not wealthy, if that is what you are asking. My father worked in shipping for most of his life before he retired. There is nothing remarkable about my family at all." But even as she said it, something flickered at the edge of her memory, something her father had mentioned once, years ago, in passing, about an uncle she had never met, a man who had made a fortune in ways her father always refused to discuss in detail, a man the family had cut ties with, long before Naomi was even born. "There might be someone," she said slowly, her own voice sounding strange to her ears as the memory surfaced more fully. "An uncle, my father's older brother. I never met him. My family never spoke about him, except to say he had made choices that put him beyond forgiveness. I always assumed it meant something ordinary, a falling out over money or family disputes." Damon's expression had gone very still. What was his name? Naomi tried to recall, reaching back through years of half-remembered conversations, overheard fragments from when she was a child too young to understand what the adults around her were discussing in hushed, careful tones. "I do not remember exactly," she admitted, "but I remember my father saying once that his brother had built something dangerous, something that eventually consumed everything decent that had once been part of him." "Naomi," Damon said slowly, and something in the way he said her name sent a fresh chill through her body. "I need you to think very carefully. Is there any chance that man's name was Cain?" The question hung in the air between them, and Naomi felt the world tilt sideways as pieces she had never thought to connect suddenly slotted together with horrifying clarity. She had never known her uncle's full name, had never had reason to ask, but the shape of the memory, the careful avoidance with which her family always changed the subject whenever he came up, fit with a chilling precision she could no longer dismiss as coincidence. "I do not know for certain," she whispered, "but it would explain everything, would it not? Why he chose me specifically, why he wanted us together on that train." Damon nodded slowly, the pieces settling into place in his own mind as well. "If Victor Kane is your uncle," he said, "then tonight was never simply about hunting me down for old grievances. It was about finding you as well, using our paths crossing as the perfect opportunity to bring us both into his reach at once." Naomi sat in stunned silence, trying to process the possibility that the monster hunting them through the darkness of this endless night might share her own blood, might be tied to her in ways she had never imagined, and certainly never wanted. The shed around them suddenly felt smaller, more exposed, as if the walls themselves offered no true protection against a danger that had apparently been waiting for her, in some form, her entire life. "We need to keep moving," Damon said quietly, rising from the crate, his earlier exhaustion replaced by renewed urgency. "If I am right about this, Victor will not simply give up because we escaped the train. He will search for you specifically now, family or not, and we need to be far from here before he finds this shed." Naomi rose on legs that still trembled, though now the tremor came from something deeper than mere fear, a betrayal she had not known existed until moments ago, a family secret that had apparently shaped the entire course of this impossible night without her ever knowing it lurked beneath the surface of her ordinary, unremarkable life. They stepped back out into the darkness together, the forest stretching ahead of them once more, and Naomi understood, with a clarity that settled deep and certain within her, that whatever came next would not simply be about escaping Victor Kane. It would be about confronting a truth about herself she had never known to look for, and deciding what kind of person she intended to become in the face of that discovery. Dawn was still hours away when they reached the edge of the forest and found the road Damon had promised, a narrow stretch of cracked asphalt winding between empty fields. Neither of them spoke for a long while as they walked along its shoulder, both lost in the weight of what had been uncovered in the shed, the possibility that Naomi's blood connected her, however distantly, to the man who now hunted them both. "There is a town a few miles ahead," Damon said eventually, breaking the silence. "Small enough that Victor's people are unlikely to expect us there, at least not yet. We can find a way to keep moving from there, put real distance between us and tonight." "And then what?" Naomi asked. "We cannot run forever, Damon. If Victor truly believes I am his family, he is not simply going to give up and let either of us disappear." Damon's jaw tightened, the truth of her words settling over him visibly. "No," he admitted, "he will not. Men like Victor do not let go of things they have decided belong to them, and if he believes you are part of his bloodline, he will see that as a claim worth pursuing indefinitely." "Then we need another plan," Naomi said, "not just running, something that actually ends this." They walked in silence for a while longer, the first hints of gray beginning to touch the eastern horizon, promising a dawn that felt, to Naomi, both welcome and terrifying, a new day that would bring with it whatever consequences their escape from the train had set into motion. As they crested a small rise in the road, headlights appeared in the distance behind them, moving steadily closer along the otherwise empty stretch of asphalt. "Off the road," Damon said sharply, pulling her toward the tree line bordering the fields. "Now." They crouched low in the underbrush as the vehicle approached, its headlights sweeping across the road ahead, and Naomi held her breath as it slowed, then stopped, precisely at the point where they had left the road only moments before. A figure emerged from the driver's side, and even in the dim pre-dawn light, Naomi recognized the confident, measured way the person moved. "Priya," Damon breathed, his hand tightening protectively around Naomi's arm. Priya stood beside the car for a long moment, scanning the darkness around her, with the careful attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. "I know you can hear me," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet fields. "Victor sent me alone this time. No one else is coming. I only want to talk." "Do not trust her," Naomi whispered. "I do not," Damon replied quietly. But if she truly is alone, this might be our only chance to understand exactly what Victor wants before he finds another way to force the issue. He rose slowly from their hiding place, guiding Naomi up beside him, and stepped out onto the road, positioning himself between her and Priya, despite the distance still separating them. "Talk then," he called out. "But know that if this is another trap, it will be the last one you help set for me." Priya raised her hands slightly, a gesture of peace that did little to ease the tension coiled through Naomi's body. "Victor did not send me to bring you in by force," she said, walking slowly closer, stopping a careful distance away. "He sent me to explain something he believes you deserve to understand before this goes any further." "Then explain it," Damon said. Priya's eyes shifted to Naomi, and something in her expression softened, almost sympathetic, though Naomi could not bring herself to trust the change. "Victor is your father's brother," Priya said directly, confirming the suspicion that had haunted Naomi since the shed. "But there is more to it than simple family connection. Your father did not simply distance himself from Victor over a moral disagreement, as your family always told you. He took something from Victor when he left, something Victor has spent decades trying to recover." "What could my father possibly have taken from a man like Victor?" Naomi asked, her voice unsteady, despite her best efforts to sound composed. "Information," Priya said. "Records detailing years of Victor's operations, kept as insurance against exactly the kind of confrontation Victor might one day bring to his family's door. Your father never used it, never went to authorities, never tried to profit from what he held. He simply kept it hidden, a silent threat that ensured Victor left him and his family alone for over 30 years. Naomi felt the ground shift beneath the weight of this revelation, decades of careful family silence suddenly making a terrible kind of sense. "And now Victor wants it back," she said slowly. "Now Victor wants it back," Priya confirmed. "And when your father passed away last year, Victor believed the information might finally have become vulnerable, passed down through the family without the same careful protection your father had maintained for so long." "My father died of a heart condition," Naomi said, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them, grief and fear tangling together in a way that made it difficult to think clearly. "That had nothing to do with any of this." "Perhaps," Priya said, though her tone suggested doubt she did not voice aloud. "But his death created an opportunity Victor was not willing to ignore. He began searching for whatever your father left behind, and when that search led him to discover you existed, alive, unaware of any of this, he saw an opportunity to resolve two problems at once." "Two problems," Damon repeated, his voice tight. "Meaning me as well." "Meaning you as well," Priya confirmed. "Victor never stopped looking for you either, Damon, not truly. When his search for the family records happened to intersect with information about your new life, arranging for your paths to cross felt, to him, like an elegant solution. Bring you both in together, resolve old business and new business in a single stroke." Naomi's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what she was hearing, the sudden collapse of everything she had believed about her own quiet, unremarkable life. Her father, the man she had always known as gentle and reserved, had apparently spent decades protecting a secret dangerous enough to draw the attention of a man like Victor Kane, and had never once given any indication of the weight he carried. "Where is this information supposed to be?" Damon asked. "If Victor believes it exists somewhere within Naomi's reach, he must have some idea of where to look." Priya hesitated, and for the first time since she had appeared, something like genuine uncertainty crossed her expression. "He does not know precisely," she admitted. "That is, in part, why he wanted you both brought to him rather than simply eliminated. He believes Naomi may know something, consciously or not, that could lead to its location, and he believed your presence, Damon, might provide additional leverage to ensure her full cooperation." "I do not know anything," Naomi said, panic rising sharp and sudden in her chest. "I never knew any of this existed until this exact moment. How could I possibly know where to find something I did not even know I was looking for?" Priya's expression remained carefully neutral, though something in her eyes suggested she believed Naomi's protest, even if it would not matter to the man who had sent her. That is a conversation you will need to have with Victor directly, she said. I am simply here to deliver his message and offer you both a choice. What choice? Damon asked warily. Come with me now, willingly, and Victor has promised a civil conversation, an opportunity to explain your situation and negotiate whatever resolution might satisfy him, Priya said. Continue running and he will assume you intend to use whatever information you possess against him, which will change the nature of how he chooses to resolve this situation considerably. The threat, though delivered calmly, carried an unmistakable weight, and Naomi understood immediately that the alternative to cooperation was not simply continued danger, but something far more final. She glanced at Damon, searching his expression for guidance, and found there the same grim understanding that had settled over her own thoughts. If we go with you, Damon said slowly, what guarantee do we have that Victor intends to honor any promise of civil conversation? Men like him do not have a strong history of keeping such promises, as I remember quite clearly. Priya's jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of something that might have been genuine discomfort crossing her features. I cannot offer you guarantees, Damon. I can only tell you that refusing this offer will not end well for either of you, while accepting it, at minimum, gives you the opportunity to speak for yourselves before any final decisions are made. Naomi's mind worked quickly, turning over the pieces of information Priya had provided, searching for any advantage they might use, any leverage that could shift the balance of power away from Victor and toward their own survival. An idea began to form, fragile and uncertain, but the only option that offered any possibility of ending this danger permanently, rather than simply delaying its inevitable return. I will go, Naomi said suddenly, drawing surprised looks from both Priya and Damon. Naomi, Damon said sharply, you do not understand what you are agreeing to. I understand exactly what I am agreeing to, Naomi said, meeting his eyes with a resolve that surprised even herself. I am agreeing to stop running from something that clearly is not going to stop chasing us. If Victor wants information he believes my family kept hidden, then the only way to truly end this is to face him directly and make him understand there is nothing left to find, or convince him that whatever exists would be worse for him exposed than left buried. That is an enormous risk, Damon said, his voice low with concern that Naomi recognized, somewhere beneath her own fear, as something closer to genuine care than simple professional caution. It is, Naomi agreed. But continuing to run means living the rest of my life waiting for him to find us again, and I refuse to live like that. I would rather face this now, on whatever terms we can negotiate, than spend years looking over my shoulder for a danger that will eventually catch up to us regardless. Damon studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, a recognition of the same resolve he himself had shown years earlier when he refused Victor's order, though the circumstances now were vastly different. If we do this, he said finally, we do it together, and we do it on our terms, not simply walking blindly into whatever Victor has prepared. Agreed, Naomi said. Priya watched this exchange with an unreadable expression, though something in her posture suggested relief that the confrontation had not escalated into further danger, at least not immediately. I will take you to him, she said, but I would advise you both to think very carefully about what you intend to say, because Victor does not respond well to being told there is nothing left for him to gain. They climbed into the car Priya had arrived in, and as the vehicle pulled back onto the road, carrying them toward whatever confrontation awaited, Naomi found herself surprisingly steady, despite the enormity of what lay ahead. She thought of her father, the secrets he had carried silently for decades, the protection he had unknowingly provided her simply by keeping his past buried so completely that she had never once suspected its existence. She thought of Damon beside her, a man who had once walked away from violence at enormous personal cost, choosing decency, even when it meant enduring pain he still carried visibly on his face. The drive was long, winding through countryside that gradually gave way to the outskirts of what appeared to be a private estate, toll gates opening automatically as Priya's car approached, revealing a sprawling property secluded behind dense hedges and careful landscaping that spoke of considerable wealth accumulated over many years. Naomi's stomach tightened as the house came into view, elegant and imposing, utterly at odds with the violence and fear associated with the man who apparently called it home. They were led inside, through halls lined with expensive art and quiet, watchful staff who never quite met their eyes, until they reached a study where Victor Kane waited, seated behind a wide desk, his expression calm and measured, in a way that felt more unsettling than any outward display of anger could have managed. "Naomi," he said, rising as they entered, his voice carrying warmth that felt deeply, disturbingly false, given everything she now understood about him. "You look remarkably like your father did at your age." "I am not here for family reminiscing," Naomi said, forcing steadiness into her voice, despite the fear coiling tight in her chest. "I am here because you seem to believe I know something I do not, and I would like the opportunity to explain that, before this goes any further." Victor's expression flickered, something calculating moving behind his eyes as he studied her, searching, she suspected, for any sign of deception. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chairs positioned before his desk. "Let us discuss this properly then, and see where the truth actually lies." Naomi and Damon sat, and for the next hour, the conversation that followed tested every ounce of resolve Naomi possessed, Victor probing carefully at her knowledge, her memories, her father's final months, searching relentlessly for any thread that might lead him toward what he sought. Naomi answered honestly, again and again, insisting that she had known nothing of her father's past, that whatever information he sought had died with the man who kept it hidden, or remained buried somewhere she had no knowledge of and no ability to locate. It was Damon who finally shifted the direction of the conversation, leaning forward with a calm, deliberate confidence that Naomi recognized as the same careful control he had shown throughout their entire ordeal. "Consider this, Victor," he said. "If this information truly exists somewhere, and her father protected it carefully enough that even his own daughter never learned of it, then it is buried deeply enough that continuing to threaten her serves no purpose. You will never find it through her, because she genuinely does not know where to look. Your only remaining option is to accept that whatever her father held against you died with him, buried wherever he chose to keep it, safe from both of us." Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying them both with an expression that gave away nothing of his internal calculations. Finally he sat back in his chair, something in his posture suggesting, if not defeat, at least a recognition that the path he had pursued tonight had reached its natural end. "Perhaps you are right," he said slowly. "Perhaps my brother's secret truly did die with him, buried beyond even his daughter's reach." He studied Naomi for a long moment, something almost like genuine curiosity in his gaze. "You have his resolve at least, that much is clear." "I have my own resolve," Naomi said firmly. "Not his, not yours, my own." Something in her tone seemed to settle whatever remained of Victor's uncertainty, and he nodded slowly, a decision reached that Naomi could not fully interpret but that felt, cautiously, like it might mean the end of the immediate danger they had faced throughout this endless night. "You may go," he said finally, "both of you. I have no further use for pursuing what is clearly beyond recovery." Naomi did not trust the sudden reprieve fully, some instinct warning her that men like Victor rarely let go of anything so easily, but she rose from her chair regardless, Damon beside her, and together they walked out of the study, through the quiet halls of the estate, and into the pale light of early morning that had finally broken over the horizon while they sat inside. Outside, the air felt cleaner somehow, the danger of the night beginning to loosen its grip on her chest, for the first time since she had boarded that train, what felt like a lifetime ago. Damon walked beside her toward the gates, silent, thoughtful, and Naomi found herself studying his profile in the growing light, this man who had entered her life through nothing more than a single available seat, and had somehow become bound to her through the most dangerous night of her existence. "What happens now?" she asked as they passed through the gates, leaving the estate behind them. Damon considered the question carefully before answering. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have spent years running from my past, and tonight, for the first time, I finally faced it directly instead of simply avoiding it. I am not entirely certain what comes next, for either of us." "Maybe that is all right," Naomi said. Maybe not knowing is better than running from something forever. Damon looked at her then, something warm and uncertain moving behind his careful, guarded expression, the first genuine softness she had seen from him since the moment she sat down beside him on that train. Maybe it is, he agreed quietly. They walked together down the quiet road, the early morning light stretching long shadows ahead of them, neither entirely certain what the future held, but both, for the first time in longer than either cared to admit, walking toward it rather than away.